with the 11th century, most of the Muslims accept that it is the end of ijtihad, the age of ijtihad. To talk about this matter, first I think I have to ask you something. Did I mention about the history of glass and the importance of glass for the Romans? During the Pax Romana, Rome became a huge empire. People were having legal transactions and trade. It was prosperous time. So because of that, we have glass all around the Roman Empire. Because of that securities, because of that rule of law, people start to create such things. So glass during the Pax Romana age actually shows us how that time was a prosperous time. Islam had such a commodity for themselves, just like what glass means for the Romans. And do you know what is that? So paper, actually. The paper was not widely used in the Mediterranean basin. Before that, people only were using papyrus and parchments, which was actually highly expensive. If you want to have papyrus, you're supposed to have papyrus plants, which only grows in Egypt. So you don't have papyrus all around the Mediterranean basin. You don't have papyrus in Europe, for instance, because it is only growing in Egypt. Or, you know what is pergamon parchment? Membrances, actually. So it is the membranes of sheeps or lambs. So you take the leather and make it so thin, it becomes something like paper, but which is highly expensive. So that means before the Islamic age, actually, paper was not widely used. So that means people were not actually writing so much things actually before the Islam, because paper is not an Islamic invention actually, just like glass is not a Roman invention. It was invented by the people in the Levant region, in the Eastern Mediterranean, around Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. All those places first invented all those glasses and start to mass produce them for entire world. So paper was also invented by the Chinese. But since Islam became a huge, mighty empire from China to Spain, and since they had the rule of law and the securities inside the Islamical empire, you would travel around this Islamical domain from China to Spain. There was a huge prosperity for the people. And because of that, such things become much more common for the people. So people start to have much more transactions. People start to buy and sell so many goods because there is rule of law, because there are securities. You won't be murdered on the road, or your goods will not be plundered by some pirates or some other bandits. And because of that, we are going to see that paper becomes a common good for everyone. And do you know, since when we have minuscule letters in the Latin alphabet? Because in the classical period, in the classical Roman age, people were only using capital letters. With the 9th century, when Europe buying paper from the Islamic domain, and they also start to produce their own papers, now they can print books with them. And with that, we are going to see that people start to invent minuscule letters. It starts with the age of Charlemagne in the 10th century, because now they have paper. Thanks to Islamic domain, it created a huge trade network from China to Spain. So that shows us actually there is a huge prosperity, and it created a rule of law that people can start to sell and mass produce such things, become much more common for common people, such as how glass become a common good for common man during the Pax Romana period. So at that time, with the 11th century, Abbasid Caliphate is going to diminish, and afterwards Sunnis now start to claim that it is the end of Ijtihad age. It's the gates of Ijtihad has been closed. It is the end of that prosperity. That one united huge empire has been destroyed. The Abbasid Caliphate. Office of Caliphate is going to be meaningless. As you might remember, when the Mongolians invaded the city of Baghdad and killed the Caliph, and his descendants ran away to Egypt, now Mamluk dynasty are going to be the protectorates of the Abbasid Caliphs. But Caliph actually a political leader, but he is not politically ruling Egypt. That means he becomes a kind of puppet for the Mamlukids, which means actually Caliphate is not a political office anymore. So that means Caliphate is not a kind of an important office as before, as original. Until that 11th century, we had huge lawyers, huge legal interpreters like for instance Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, Abu Hanbal, those kind of legal scholars. They started those Sunni law schools, for instance. But after the 11th century, now Sunnis claims that the gates of Ijtihad closed. So that means we don't have new such magnificent legal scholars. So we are not going to have new different legal schools, new different Sunni sects. So it is the end of that. Now we only have 4 sects for the Sunnis. Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik were not state officials. They were not working for the government. But since they are the founders of legal schools, you might presume if someone creates a legal school, if someone creates a legal interpretation methodology, they're supposed to be inside the government if they are the founders of the law. Because law, as we might know today, is actually created by the state, by the government. But in that early stages, the interpreters of law, the ones who invented the legal structures, were not part of the government, were not part of the state. So the law actually was going to be invented and interpreted by the people who are not agents of the government, who are not working for the state. And even those early scholars who found those law schools, such as Malikis and Hanafis, for instance, Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, have been prosecuted by the government at their time, and they have been tortured by their government. And even founder of Hanafi law school, Abu Hanifa, has been killed by Abbasids. He has a very interesting story actually. At his time, first he has been tortured and prosecuted by the Umayyads, and then Abbasids overcome the Umayyads. They were politically different camps, Umayyads and Abbasids. And you would accept that Abbasids would embrace Abu Hanifa and Abu Hanifa might embrace Abbasids. But no, Abu Hanifa also defies Abbasids as he defies Umayyads as well. So because of that, Abbasid government also persecutes Abu Hanifa and also tortures him and even executes and kills him. So one of the founders of the most populated legal school among the Muslims is Abu Hanifa. But he seems like an anarchical figure because he is not accepting state offices, state duties. Both Umayyads and Abbasid, they want him to be a judge for their government. So they invite him to be the judge of the Umayyads, and they invited him to be the judge of Abbasids. But he denied both of them. And because of that, he was prosecuted by the both camps, Abbasids and Umayyads, and he had been killed. But even after his death, his followers continued to interpret law according to his methodology, and now that became the most populated sect among the Muslims. Although Sunni schools were not denying each other, they are accepting one another, but they have different interpretations for themselves. So Abu Hanifa was very interesting figure in that sense. So he creates law, he is not part of the government, and he is even executed by the government. It reminds me the example of Gaius from Rome. He had been a very important figure among the Roman lawyers for the Roman legal interpretations. So Gaius was very important figure for the Roman law in the Pax Romana period. But also Gaius had never been part of the Roman government, never been part of the Roman state. So he was creating the law, but he was not part of the state. Creating law and interpreting law, as we seen from today, is a kind of exclusive business only for state and government. But such figures as Gaius from Rome or Imam Malik or Abu Hanifa, they are also legal interpreters, legal scholars, but they were not part of the government. They were not part of the state. But the time is going by and the life is changing. So that means we are going to see different problems. We are going to have different social institutions. So that means we are going to have different legal problems, which means we are going to need different legal solutions. But if the gates of Ijtihad close, we are going to need a new legal source, which is going to be the legal source of fatwa, Opinio Iuris. So it is a legal opinion. Basically, actually, any Muslim with sanity and with the understanding of the legal structure can give you a legal remedy, can interpret law, and can have an opinion on a legal matter. So opinio Iuris, fatwa. So that means actually it is not exclusive for the government, for the state. But after the 11th century, we are going to see that all the Islamic states, actually states cannot be Islamic, only people can be Islamic, but it's a concept you would see all around, people going to write down Islamic states, Islamic governments, Islamic something, where only people can be Islamic. So on all those states are going to invent such offices for muftis, for fatwa, for legal source, and they're going to create that fatwa legal source as exclusive only for state, so the government, so the state can be the source of law. So only government, only state can interpret the law, what is just, what is law. Only government can decide that. Throughout the history of Islam after the 11th century, all those states such as Seljukids or Ottomans, they are all going to have their own fatwa offices. And those legal interpreters who are working for the government, for the state, who are state agents, are going to interpret the law for the government in that sense. Such as, if I give you an example for the Ottomans, Mehmed II, who conquered Istanbul, the city of Constantinople. After the conquest of Istanbul, he claimed himself as the new Roman emperor, the Kaiseri Rum, the Kaiser, Caesar of Rome. So he claimed himself as the Roman emperor. And also, he created a new legal code for the Ottomans, which is called as Kanunname-i Ali Osman, which means the very pristine legal code of the Ottomans. So Fatih Kanunnamesi, the canon, code, the norm, the law of Mehmed II. So in there, who is going to inherit the throne is a huge problem for the Turks, and they couldn't find a solution for that. So Mehmed II, in that legal binding document, he says, whoever becomes sultan after me, whoever becomes sultan from my child might murder his brothers, which is acceptable by the Islamic standards, he claims. He also claims that he asked that legal scholars about these matters, and all the Islamic law scholars claims to be that accepting the decision of Mehmed II that a sultan can murder his brothers, which is very applicable and very acceptable in the Islamic standards. They claim, actually it is not acceptable in the Islamic standards. If you murder your brother, which is a crime basically according to Islamic law, which is not acceptable, which is not Islamic actually. But now we have an emperor, Mehmed II. He claims that he is the new Roman emperor. He is the ruler of all the Turks and the Romans, and everyone inside the Mediterranean realm has a code, and he claims that his sons, when become sultan, can murder their brothers, which is not illegal. It is according to Islam, and it is an Islamic action. He claims, all the scholar accepts, he claims, which is not actually. So this is the fatwa makam we are talking about. So this is kind of a legal interpretation method to legitimizing the legal policies of the government. Or I can give you another example from the Selim I from Ottoman Empire again, when he was going to fight against Egyptians and the Persians, Safavids and the Mamlukids, also had a very important legal document from his mufti. So he has a fatwa. That fatwa was claiming that the Shiites were not real Muslims after all, and they were not even Ahli Kitab, which means the follower of the message of the God. So that means Selim I can kill all the Shiites and can plunder all of their goods. The problem is actually, in Islam, there is no such authority to decide who is Muslim and who is not Muslim. The Shaykhul Islam of the Ottomans, the Mufti Makam, the Fatwa Makam, the Fatwa Office is not something like the papacy. It cannot deny people's beliefs. So actually, it is not a legitimate document in that sense. So I don't care if anyone is Sunni or Shia. If the people claiming themselves as the Muslims, that means they are the Muslims. But for the Mufti of the Selim I, the Shiites were not Muslims. So their goods can be plundered and they can be massacred. Fatwa becomes a different legal source for the government. And throughout the Ottoman history, it is going to be a huge problem for the legal interpretations and the legitimacy of the decisions of the monarchy. Even after the parliamentary system, there is a rivalry between the Sultan, the king, and within the parliament. So the parliament is claiming to be the house of Ijma, because the parliament now is claiming in the 19th century of the Ottomans, the parliament is claiming that Ijma is a source of Islamic law, which means the consensus among the people. So since this parliament of the Ottomans is creating a legal consensus for the people, that means the decisions of the parliament should be accepted as a source of law for the Muslims. So it's a kind of source of Islamic law as well. The interpretations of the parliament, the decisions of the parliament can be seen as the Islamic law. The parliament claims against the Sultan, and the Sultan is standing against the parliament because he claims that the parliament actually usurping his powers. He just wants to continue as an absolute monarch, which we are going to see that Abdul Hamid II actually was going to close the parliament until the 1908 coup d'etat against the Sultan, when the armed forces stand against the Sultan and they opened the parliament again. Afterwards, they abdicated Abdul Hamid II from the throne, instead Mehmed V, and afterwards Mehmed VI, and we are going to see that afterwards the new military regime would force Ottomans into the First World War, which is going to destroy the Ottoman Empire, and afterwards we are going to have the Turkish Republic, which is a secular state. You might kill your brother, you can murder many people, but you can't claim that it is just. You can't claim that it is legal. You can't claim that it is acceptable by the legal standards. You can't claim that it is according to Roman law, it's according to Islamic law, or it is according to common law. You can't claim it is just. It is not just to murder. Murdering is wrong in the Islamic law, in the Roman law, in the common law. So you can't have any justification for these kind of scenarios. There was a recent example for that. While I was talking about Immanuel Kant, I used that example. For instance, after the 9/11, in Germany, they created a new legislation. German parliament decided that in similar scenarios, if a terrorist organization hijacks a plane for a similar terror attack, the German Air Force might destroy that plane. After that legislation, some German lawyers gone to the Constitutional Court in Germany against that new law because they claim that it was against the German Constitution. Do you know what is the first article in the German Constitution? The first article claims that all legal structure of Germany depends on the foundation of the German legal structure is human honor, human dignity. Can you explain me what is the dignity of humankind? It is hard to define, right? But we have a great example for that from Immanuel Kant. The court decided that law was unconstitutional because the Constitutional Court says when you kill those people in the plane, because there are some civilians in the plane, why are you shooting down that plane? To save the people on the ground, right? So the people on the plane would die for the sake of the people on the ground, which is unacceptable according to the German Constitutional Court, because it says it is objectifying people, because people cannot be objectified. All people are ends in themselves. We are our own purposes. As a sentient being, I have a brain, I am thinking of myself, I have my own desires, I have my own purposes. I am an end in me, as Immanuel Kant would explain. Kant claims that you cannot objectify people, so you can only use objects, you cannot use people. People are not objects. But if you shoot down that plane, that means you are objectifying those people. You are killing those people in the plane to save those people on the ground, which is unacceptable against the human dignity, because you are objectifying them and you are denying their humanity. So I am going to use the same argument in here to end a civil war, not even ending the civil war, but preventing the civil war. The civil war not even started. Let's kill some children, let's kill some babies. This is not acceptable, this is not just, this is not ethical. You cannot just kill people and justify your actions by the consequences, the good consequences of your actions. So I hope I express my feelings diligently. I hope you understand the dilemma in here with the Immanuel Kant